Yes, indeedy, folks. It's the Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. Once again, it is time to cab. We have to get this cab business in, folks, because soon August will be past. And after all, cab does stand for Celebrate August in Boise. In past episodes of Cab, we have seen that even though we get 8 inches of water in Boise, the Boise River watershed gets a total of 24 inches. We have seen that 24 inches of water falls on an area called the Boise River watershed, which is larger than Delaware and Rhode Island put together. It's 17% larger, and that collects the water into the Boise River. We have seen that we collect the water from that large watershed into 3 large storage reservoirs, and that these 3 reservoirs together hold over 1 million acre-feet of water. That's 1 square acre filled 1 foot deep in water, and there are more than 1 million of them stored above Boise. During the summer, more than half the water that is let into the Boise River is diverted into canals. And we saw that because of these canals, 431 square miles of land are irrigated and turned from desert into farmland. That is an area the size of 28% of Rhode Island is turned into farmland. So how do we turn this desert into this farmland? To answer that, we first have to look at this. This is what our forefathers found when they came to this valley. It is called dirt. Dirt is very useful stuff for building road beds. It's very useful stuff for building foundations for buildings upon. But it is not useful at all for feeding ourselves. To convert this desert dirt into something useful for raising crops, our forefathers first started by removing the sagebrush. The sagebrush and the rocks. The rocks went to build fences and some homes. The sagebrush was put up in great piles and used for firewood. The valley must have certainly smelled of sage smoke for several years during settling the land. Wealthy farmers, those who had a horse or a mule, might gather with their neighbor and put the 2 together and drag a chain between them and knock out most of the brush and only have to dig up some. Many of the farmers, of course, did it simply by using a hand tool called the grub hoe. The grub hoe is very much like a pickaxe. Unfortunately, all I could find was an illustration of a pickaxe. The pickaxe has picks on both sides. The grub hoe has a flat appendage on one side, very much like a very heavy-duty hoe. That way you can pick at the sagebrush, or you can use the hoe part of it to knock more dirt away if the dirt is soft enough. It was grueling, hot, sweaty work, back-breaking labor. I'm sure they did as much of this work during the spring and fall as they could. The ground would have been frozen in the winter, and it would have been just too darn hot in the summer. The forefathers then planted plants with deep roots. Particularly alfalfa was popular. It grows, it's very hardy. You can use it to feed your stock, and it has very, very good deep roots. Of course, they planted other things also for cash crops. But alfalfa was very useful for getting the roots down in the soil so that within about 10 years, those roots had decayed, had joined in with all that rock and sand, and what started out as dirt became soil. Soil is truly amazing stuff. We all know that this guy lives in soil. In fact, I figure the more of these guys you got in your soil, the healthier your soil is. But this guy isn't the only guy who lives in soil. The fact is, scientists got curious about just exactly how much life there is in a cubic foot of soil. So they have taken samples from different forests, different marshes, different pieces of land from around the world, and very carefully measured them. They divided them into the things that you can see and into the things that you cannot see. Of the things that you can see, many are extremely small and you have to look quite closely, but you can see them. Worldwide, on an average, 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot of soil, 1 cubic foot of soil, contains over 40,000 visible living animals. This is not counting the rabbits and foxes and deer that might live on top of the land. But it does include 25,000 mites, 10,000 springtail worms, which are very small worms, and 5,000 other bugs, beetles, lice, spiders, worms, centipedes, flies, 100 different kinds of different species, all living within 1 cubic foot of the soil that you walk on. This is what we can see. Now, when they talked about the things we couldn't see, the microscopic, they went and looked at just 1 ounce of soil. Not a cubic foot, but in 1 ounce of soil. Each ounce of soil contains billions of microscopic life forms. There's well over a mile of roots from fungus, plus close to that of other roots, in 1 ounce of soil. In 1 ounce of soil, the number of bacteria outnumber the human population of Earth by about 20 times. A similar number of viruses and other microbes are in there, and their population is inverse to their size. So the larger the microbe, the fewer the microbes there are. The smaller the microbe, their numbers go way up. And folks, that's in 1 ounce of soil. Put that together with all the things that we can see, the 40,000 species that we can see, and you can tell that soil is not dirt. Soil is a living thing. I once saw a bumper sticker that said, "Don't treat your soil like dirt." There was an awful lot of wisdom in that. This is what the settlers of this valley understood when they planted crops with deep roots for the first 10 years of converting this valley desert into a valley garden. Today, we have fed much of this precious soil, which is fed water by gravity, which is a fairly reliable source for moving water around, into housing developments. To make housing developments, we bring in sand and dirt to build the roads, and then we build houses on the mud that's left. We could put housing developments on the desert and put down an inch of topsoil and have an instant housing development. Meanwhile, our farms have been pushed out on the desert where they are dependent on pumps to push pressurized water around. Personally, I think that although the power company does a good job of supplying power, I'm not sure but what gravity is a more reliable source of water for our food. In the meantime, vast tracts of new soil are being made south of Boise, all thanks to signs like this. A simple enough sign whose message is revealed by its sister sign a little closer to where the gate is. This is 20 Mile South Farm. The story of 20 Mile South Farm is very simple. Every time we flush, the number 1 items, of course, get treated and put to the river. The items that we shouldn't have flushed get separated out and carted off to the dump. And all the number 2 items, they get turned into a product called biomass or biosolids, and they are shipped by truck out here where they are distributed on over 4,000 acres of farmland. The air and sunlight further purify them, and like all manure, it's very good for the soil. It turns that desert rocks and sand into good soil. Just in case you are the squeamish type, rest assured that the forage and grains that are grown on this 4,000 acres are not given for human consumption, but rather go to feed livestock. Boise is not the only city who solves its biosolids problem this way. In fact, it's very, very common practice all over the United States and probably all over the world. This sign is south of Kuna. I don't know if it's Kuna's biosolids or perhaps Meridian's. I'm not sure. I do have a feeling, however, that if you were a farmer and really didn't want people on your land, one of these signs might just do a great job for you. The Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo presents As the Cycle Turns. As the cycle turns, a grand celebration of traditional religion. As the Cycle Turns is generously sponsored by Granny Pie. Granny Pie, the very best. Folks, why get your apple from a tree handed to you by a lady that you just barely met in the garden? You can trust Granny. And oh my goodness, apples are so much better when they're baked up with lots of cinnamon and sugar and juice in one of Granny's pies. Granny Pie, a better way to get your apple. And now, here's your beer drinking guide to As the Cycle Turns. Folks, many of the newfangled modern religions, those that have been around 2,500 years or less, see the world as a story. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's natural for humans to identify with this, I suppose, since we have birth, life, and death. However, that's not how the ancients saw it, and it's not how many people throughout history have seen it. Rather, our traditional religions that have been around for tens of thousands of years saw life as a cycle. They understood, and their adherents still understand, that death is to birth what death is to nourishment. You can't have one without the other. Rather than an end, death is what opens up to birth and to nourishment. Without death, the wheat does not become grain. There's no reason to make seeds or fruit, so there would be no nourishment. Without death, there would be no birth, for there would be no room for the future. Death is the price we pay for the glorious gift of birth. One of the most obvious examples of this cycle that the ancients and the modern pagans understand is, of course, what we call a year. As the earth goes around the sun, we experience the birth of spring, the maturing of summer, the aging of autumn, and then, of course, the death of winter. Many ancient sites recognize the ancients' understanding of this great yearly cycle. This great cycle of life, birth, growth, withering, and death, without which there would not be seeds, there would not be melons, there would not be nourishment. Indeed, there would not be the gift of the great wahoo. The ancients and modern pagans came to understand that all of these experiences of life are indeed gods. The gods are understood to be the eternal principle, the eternal truth. These gods are expressed here on the temporal plane, on the material plane, by different beasts, different rocks, different beingnesses, different sunshines. As there can be no life without death, or indeed no death without life, you cannot have the gods without the material plane, nor can you have the material plane without the gods. This understanding of cycles and of the relationship between the principles and the material expression is the avenue with which the traditional religions connect the human spirit and the glory of life. Indeed, every event and everything in life is an expression on the material plane of one, if not several, of the eternal spiritual truths. The Egyptians called these gods Horus for springtime. The hawk can put out its wings and rise directly into the sky without flapping its wings, very much like the resurrection of life. Isis was the great mother of growth. Hathor, the great female of the evening, the relaxing, the day's work is done and it is time to relax and enjoy the beauty of the world. And Osiris was the god of winter, of death, of the underworld. His was the realm of the sheaves of wheat and the ripened grapes. Everything life eats and everything life drinks is the body and the blood of Osiris. While all of the different traditional religions have different names for these gods, they all recognize the 4 points of the compass of the cycle of life. All traditional religions also recognize that this is not just a yearly cycle. It is a cycle of everyone's life. From birth, we each experience childhood, puberty, parenthood, maturity, ripening, being an elder, being the one who tells stories and passes on knowledge, and then enter into the price we pay for birth, which is our death. Indeed, this is the cycle of any living thing, be it an earthworm, a gnat, a dolphin, a tree, a blade of grass. Any living, sentient being has this cycle of life. This cycle is one thing that we share with all of our brothers and sisters in this material expression of the spiritual truth. And traditional religions understood that this cycle happens in all of life. Just as they are a yearly cycle and a lifelong cycle, they are a daily cycle, with morning, the heat of the day, the evening, and the night. Just as the atom and the solar system reflect one another, so do the cycles of life reflect each other through all consciousness of time, through all of the ways that time is expressed. Now, having been introduced to the cycles of life, let's look into the particular god or goddess that we are celebrating now in this glorious time of the year. Here we are in the glorious time of the year that we call summer and the Egyptians called beautiful Lady Isis. It's wonderfully hot. There's really nothing logical to do except sit in the shade of a tree and drink a nice cold beverage of your choice. After all, beautiful Lady Isis is doing all the work. Isis is actually a Greek name for the Egyptian goddess, but we are going to stick with it because it's one we know how to pronounce. The worship of the goddess Isis was prevalent throughout the Egyptian Empire and well into the Christian era. This is a statue of a priestess of Isis holding a traditional bronze jug. This statue was made in the 2nd century AD in Sicily. Indeed, the congregations of Isis continued to grow until well after the Council of Nicaea, and it was a temple of Isis that was the last temple that was raided, plundered, and the priestesses and priests were murdered during the takeover of the Christian era. In ancient Egypt, Lady Isis was almost always portrayed with a chair on her crown. However, there were times that she was portrayed with the horn and the sun that was usually associated with Hathor. The ancients had a way of mixing their gods up. What was good for one god was probably good and true of another god, so they mixed and matched to their liking. When you celebrate all the gods, there is no reason to get jealous about any of them. The symbolism of the chair for a crown is that Lady Isis was the wife of Osiris. Osiris was the king and the ruler of the afterlife, of the underground, of the winter. So it was that the crown of a chair shows that Lady Isis is the queen, is the ruler of the day. The ancients understood the goddess of summer and the god of winter are the likeness, the yin and yang, the necessary plus and minus of one another. With the springtime of Horus having given birth to all of life, Lady Isis is life's mother. The summertime is when things grow, when things run in the sun and become strong and full. Lady Isis, the great mother of life, is indeed the very glory and the very beingness of this little molecule right here. Lots of hydrogen atoms, a few oxygen atoms, and one magnesium atom. Toss in a bit of nitrogen and a few other things, and you have the miracle of chlorophyll. This is a 3D rendition of what the molecule looks like. It's really a very complex molecule. And this little molecule, along with the glory of the Lady Isis, gives us the green. As I'm sure you remember from 8th grade biology, the miracle and the magic of chlorophyll is what takes air and the nutrients in soil and water and uses the energy of sunshine, the heat of the summer, and the glorious energy of light to bring us green. And what the green brings us is a process whereby water, the nutrients of soil, oxygen, and sunshine are turned into sugar. Without the sunshine of summer, the energy being taken in by chlorophyll, then we would not have the food that we eat. Lady Isis is the very act, the very being of chlorophyll and sunshine and water becoming sugar. With autumn, these dry and die and become what we call food. Food is the body and the blood of Osiris, the husband of Lady Isis. We may complain about the heat, and we may have to protect ourselves from the sunshine. But let us never stop celebrating the debt that we owe to this grand concept that the Egyptians called Lady Isis. And today we have a name for her as well. That name is summer. A lady invited her good, lifelong friend out to lunch. It wasn't long before the conversation came around to her recent divorce, and she said, "You know, I put that SOB ex-husband of mine through medical school." Her friend replied, "Girlfriend, that's nothing. I made my ex-husband a millionaire." "Oh, really?" replied her friend. "And exactly what was he when you married him?" "Well," her friend replied, "before I married him and made him a millionaire, he was a billionaire." And that's another Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next time on our last chance to look at August in Boise. Who knows what that beer drinking guide of yours will come up with. But in the meantime, keep celebrating the Great Wahoo!